Hi everyone, my name is Vladislav. I'm collaborator at Frog, um, and I figured out that I wasn't quite communicating on the updates and releases in the Frog package itself, so I decided to sum it up in a single video. Uh, what I'm going to be covering what has been happening with some issues, unexpected issues on Vercel and Next.js deployments, from which some of you might have suffered lately. And I'm also going to be covering the state management in Frog because it's quite an important and yet a complex process that I believe everyone who's working with Frog should know because there are some potential pitfalls that you might fall into, and you might think that you are crazy because something is not behaving the way that you expect it to behave. So, first off, there were some issues with Next.js and Vercel deployments, as far as I know. It might have been considered some different ones where you could see an error, um, like cannot parse property in something props because it isn't defined. This was quite of a bug to fix. I have attempted one fix. It didn't quite work well because it was working locally. I couldn't reproduce the bug until I realized that I have to actually like build the package and not start it in a dev mode, and then I was able to reproduce it. Um, and today I published a fix. So if you were affected, please upgrade to the latest version. And now, secondly, I want to cover a little bit the state management drama. Because it is quite, um, what's the word? Yeah, it is quite complex to understand, but I want to like cover what's gonna be in the next version of ROG, which is already ready to merge. So yeah, and I want to start off with one of the really important developer experience upgrades, which happened in Frog 0.15.2. That allowed image handlers context, the C variable, to access previous state, which made the separate image rendering in the image handler much easier because previously you had to pass all the variables in the um, image URL itself. So you had to serialize it, then you had to properly deserialize it, and this was quite of a headache. And with the help of one guy in discussions, Pseudobug, thank you very much for this idea to expose the previous state in Frog image. It is now possible. So you could access a previous state in the image handler. And the way it's done is that in the frames that are not initial, yeah, like this one, uh, the state is passed via the URL. Yeah, because image URLs apparently don't have any length limit. Uh, Not talking about like browser limits, but the Farcaster specific frame specification doesn't impose any limit here, so that's how it's done. And now there were also some changes with the initial state, which I'm going to be covering next, right? I'll explain what's the next change is going to be about. And um, yeah, so let's get straight to it. So the initial state, the like the this state management concept is quite important because this change pretty much allows you to build much more like state-centric frog uh, frame rather than before. And with that change that I have mentioned previously with the image handler, the way it works for the second frame, I just explained it. But for the first frame, what is actually happening is that since the first frame doesn't have any state and it cannot set any state because the VC frame state tag is disallowed in the first frame because it would be cached indefinitely, the image handler receives see previous state as the initial state that you set in the frog constructor. Yeah, and uh, I just realized that the same actually has to be done for the transaction handler and for the signature handler. In case if your frame is calling to action straight away in the very first frame, um, you pretty much could not receive any state. Yeah, even if you type it properly, c.previous state in transaction handler and signature handler would be undefined. And the next change, which I'm gonna merge, which is ready, is gonna use the same concept as with image handlers. So the transaction handler and signature handler are gonna receive the initial state, which is gonna be accessible via the already known c.previous state. One important concept that I also wanted to touch is that you cannot derive state, you cannot call c.derive state in the first frame. The reason why is because the first frame cannot set any state at all. If you want to know more details about it, I'm going to tell right now. If not, you can skip like, I think, 1 minute ahead. The problem with it is because the C-frame state tag is disallowed, as I said, because it would be indefinitely cached, and post URLs with which we define the URL paths to the next frames have a certain limit of 256 bytes, and Horsefacts has confirmed that this is going to be increased to 1024 bytes. But it's still pretty small, and it is pretty easy to overflow that limit. And once again, since the very first frame response is indefinitely cached, it would mean that your initial state, even if it is retrieved via some sort of a callback or maybe some kind of asynchronous action is being made, like let's say in polyframe, yeah, there is a bet, there is a market might be closed, and your very first frame would not be aware of that. Yeah, and it would pretty much depend on the cache data. So it's pretty easy to mess up. That's why it's like this. At the same time, the derived state variable is accessible in the first frame, but it actually won't do nothing. Yeah, and that's something that I probably should cover in the docs as well. But you could actually use derived state in the second frame as you would normally do, and it would actually change the frame. And since derived state is not accessible, well, it's accessible, but it won't do nothing in the very first frame handler. What's going into the second frame is the initial state that you have defined previously. And that's pretty much it. So something that I would recommend folks out there who build with Frog is to think more state-wise, if you're not already thinking more state-wise. The second is that initial state might be a function. It might be an asynchronous function in case if you're fetching something. It can also be a function that accepts the Honos context in case if you like have multiple handlers paths that look similarly, that like accept a common road path parameter. What you could actually use, you could use c.rec param address retrieved from this variable to define the initial state for all of those handlers. Yeah, and quite essentially, if you're about to do that, you would have to define path with a common path parameter if you want to use the initial state like that. Yeah, because initial state is passed in all of those places in the pretty much all of the very first frame interactions. Next one is that since initial state is passed in multiple places, Frog does not do any sort of caching of this initial state, which means that if you have an asynchronous function there that fetches some sort of data, you should be aware that it's not going to be an opponent and that this fetch is going to occur on the very first frame response, on the image response in case if you're using it, then on the next transaction handler or signature handler, and on the next frame as well. So your initial state, if that's a function, is going to be called a lot of times, and that's something that you should be aware of. And last but not least, something which I'm thinking about of implementing next in Frog is a possibility of passing state serializers and deserializers. Just because of the nature of the Web3, we deal with big-ints, which are unfortunately not supported in JSON.stringify and JSON.parse functions. And some of the backend frameworks like tRPC do accept serializers and deserializers, and I believe that it could be a really good addition to Frog as well. Yeah, so if you have a complex object, if you're pulling something out of your backend that might have a big int currently, and if you save it in the state, your frames won't work unless you save it as a some sort of a stringified version of it or serialized version of it or whatever. Yeah, for reference, if you're not familiar with this concept of custom serializations and deserializations, I would strongly suggest you to check out SuperJSON. That's something that I'm personally using in lots of places. And yeah, hope you liked this video. Please reply if you would want some more insights into Frog like that. I'll be trying to pull out something from this video into the docs. But just wanted to mention that I have a limited availability right now. And just want to mention for another time that I'm not sitting in Discord anymore. If you have any issues with frames, with Frog, please do spend a little of your time and create an issue in Frog repository. And please, if your issue is specific to your environment in any way, add a minimal reproducible example. Thank you.